The Ganges is the most venerated river on Earth. On its 2,500-kilometer journey from source to sea, it flows through the physical and spiritual heart of India. To bathe in these waters is said to purify the soul. To die on the riverbank is to gain entry to heaven. The Ganges' spiritual influence is matched by its physical power. The river and its tributaries support 500 million people. But today, a crisis is looming, which threatens to turn this river of life into a river of death. As India's population keeps growing, the pollution created by its people is defiling the waters which they worship. Each year, over 1 million young children are poisoned by this river. Today, the Ganges, though holy, is less than pure. No river on Earth has as much influence over its people as the Ganges. To millions of Indians, this river is a physical lifeline, providing their only source of fresh water. To Hindu believers, the Ganges is also the earthly form of the goddess Ganga. Its waters are said to be so powerful that just a drop can cleanse the body of sin. For thousands of years, this river has been the bedrock of Indian culture and belief. To the people, she is the mother who grants them eternal salvation. But in recent times, the quantity and quality of this water has been threatened. While the Himalayan glaciers which feed the river are retreating, the amount of pollution entering the waters is rising day by day. Within a generation, the Ganges might not only be too polluted to use, it might cease to exist. Today, the people of India are facing the greatest challenge in the history of the Ganges: how to purify a river which to them is the embodiment of purity itself. In Hindu culture, ordinary water is believed to have extraordinary powers. Millions of Indians follow a daily ritual of pouring a handful over themselves to remove the impurities which accumulate in the course of a day. When water is moving in a river, it's even more precious, since it carries any pollution away in its flow. All of India's major rivers are considered to be holy. But the river Ganges is the holiest of all. From its source in the Himalayas to its delta in Bengal, the Ganges creates a river basin that supports 1/10 of the world's population. But according to ancient Hindu scriptures, the river Ganges originally flowed in heaven. Long ago, she agreed to fall to earth to help humankind by cleansing and resurrecting the ashes of the dead. To save the world from the impact of the river's descent, the Hindu god Lord Shiva caught the Ganges in his hair. Today, a whole culture of worship has sprung up around the place where this mystical event is said to have happened. Situated at the foot of the Himalayas, Gangotri is the first town through which the Ganges flows on its course from mountain to sea. This also marks the place where the river Ganges is said to have fallen from heaven to earth. In winter, Gangotri is snowbound and desolate, but as soon as the ice melts and the roads open, the place comes alive with thousands of pilgrims. Visiting the Ganges at Gangotri is one of the most powerful pilgrimages a Hindu can make. At an altitude of over 3,000 meters, reaching Gangotri is no small task. Most pilgrims arrive by bus, enduring a journey of days on overcrowded coaches along treacherous mountain roads. When they eventually set foot on solid ground, foremost in their mind is reaching the river, which they call Mother Ganga. Once at the water's edge, they fulfill their pilgrimage by bathing in the ice-cold flow. Just as goddess Ganga came to cleanse the ashes of humankind, these pilgrims believe that the river will remove their sins. Here, where the river runs fast and pure, its cleansing powers are thought to be particularly strong. To thank the river for purifying them, the pilgrims may offer prayers at the temple, built, so it is said, over the exact rock upon which Lord Shiva sat to receive the Ganges in his hair. Some pilgrims employ priests to conduct private ceremonies of devotion. For a few rupees payment, they make offerings to Mother Ganga on the pilgrims' behalf. The effort of reaching Gangotri means that only devout pilgrims are prepared to endure the long coach journey to get here. But the most devout of all do not travel by bus. They choose to walk every step of the way.
I have come from Benares. It's very far. It's 1,000 kilometers away. I walked all the way. It took me 3 months. I didn't have any money, and by begging for food and drink, I managed to come here.
Nonne Nath is a sadhu, literally meaning good man. He is one of some 4 million sadhus in India who turn their back on the real world and dedicate their lives to the contemplation of God. For these men, pilgrimage is a way of life, and enduring the hardship of walking to Gangotri is a sign of their devotion. Living on charity and donations, some sadhus wear orange clothing to symbolize their rejection of material things. Some, like Nonne, cover themselves in ash as a sign of austerity. For sadhus, coming to Gangotri is an essential part of their lifelong quest to worship the deities, among whom goddess Ganga is one of the most powerful.
Every morning I get up, bathe, perform my rituals and apply ash. I perform prayers to the Mother Ganga and for the people. Then, having had my meal and water, and after the evening prayer, I have to sleep. The next morning I wake up at 4 o'clock and bathe again. This is how one has to live in Gangotri.
But for the most devout pilgrims, Gangotri is not the end of the journey. Many continue walking 17 kilometers beyond the town, across the Gangotri glacier to the ice cave at Gamuk. Literally meaning cow's mouth, this ice cave contains the milky glacial spring which feeds the Ganges. As the spiritual source of the river, Hindus believe that the water's cleansing powers here are sublime. But the exact location of this spring has shifted over the course of time as the ice fields which feed the river have retreated. Each year, the Gangotri glacier shrinks by 25 meters. This would explain the apparent confusion in religious accounts of where the Ganges begins. For though the glacial spring which feeds the river rises today at Gamuk, 4,000 years ago, when the Hindu scriptures were written, the glacier would have extended all the way to Gangotri, giving rise to the legend that it was here the Ganges fell to earth. Experts warn that at this rate, the glacier will disappear by 2035, and the spiritual source of the Ganges will dry up completely. The effects of such an event would be catastrophic for all those who depend on these waters to sustain both their body and their soul. From Gangotri, the Ganges plunges downstream through the rugged mountains of northern India, bringing life to the land. In these poor and remote regions, the river provides the only source of fresh water. In a country which suffers severe water shortages, this is the greatest gift the Ganges can bestow. Later along its course, the river sustains many more people as its waters are diverted and pumped to thirsty cities and towns. Today, the Ganges and its tributaries support half the population of India. As well as quenching people's thirst, the river sustains their livestock and fertilizes their land. Mineral-rich sediment eroded from the Himalayan rocks is carried along in the flow and deposited across the river valleys, creating rich agricultural soils. It's no wonder that the gifts which the river brings are seen as blessings from the goddess. Some 225 kilometers downstream of Gangotri is the town of Haridwar. Haridwar is revered as the place where the Ganges leaves the mountains and enters the plains, becoming the force which fertilizes the land. Each year, 18 million people visit the town to celebrate this crucial junction in the river's story. The steep river slopes are lined with specially built steps known as ghats to allow easy access for bathing. But anyone entering these waters takes a big risk. For here, where the Ganges changes from mountain torrent to mighty waterway, the current is particularly strong. Each year, several people are washed away by the raging waters. Yet it's precisely because of the fast waters that the worshippers flock to bathe here. The rapid current is proof that the river arrives fresh and pure from the mountains. What's more, Haridwar is one of the first major towns downstream of the Ganges source that is easily reached by road, making it one of the most popular pilgrimage sites in India. Since it's the religious obligation of every Hindu to make at least one visit to the Ganges in their lifetime, coming to Haridwar is a chance for the whole family to fulfill their duty. The town is set up to cater for this mass religious tourism. From the shade of their wooden shelters, Hindu priests offer a variety of services, from arranging accommodation to conducting religious ceremonies. One which is particularly important to Hindu families is the mundan, a head-shaving ceremony performed in the first or third year of life. The hair present at birth represents unwanted traits from past lives. To ensure the child doesn't carry bad qualities from the past to the present, the head is shaved and the old hair thrown to the Ganges to be purified. Families go to extraordinary lengths to ensure that their children's mundan ceremony takes place on the Ganges. Before leaving Haridwar, even the most pious tourists like to buy a memento of their visit. Among the most popular gifts are sealed vials of river water, known as Ganga Jal. The label claims that adding a few drops of Ganga Jal to your bath will ease all kinds of illness and rid the body of sin. Most locals, however, choose to buy a plastic bottle, which they fill up for themselves. What seems like a cheap gift is in fact the most precious souvenir any visitor can take home. For Hindus believe Ganga Jal has supernatural powers. It's claimed that, never mind how long it's kept, Ganges water does not deteriorate, but stays fresh even when exposed to the air. It's even said that mosquitoes can't breed in Ganga Jal. The pilgrims believe the river possesses these powers because it's the earthly form of the goddess Ganga. But some seek a more scientific explanation. Downstream of the main bathing ghats, Dr. Dwar leads a team of scientists from the Malaria Research Centre, taking samples of Ganges water for analysis. Through studying the precise composition of these samples, Dr. Dwar's team have revealed that Ganga Jal does have unique qualities.
It's true that Ganga Jal has a higher level of dissolved oxygen compared to water from other areas. This is firstly due to the fast flow of the river, and secondly the turbulence of the water. The water is very turbulent, and we think that is why it has higher levels of dissolved oxygen.
The scientists believe that the high levels of oxygen in Ganga Jal make it difficult for bacteria to reproduce. This would explain why the water stays fresh for so long. But today, dam and water diversion projects are altering the flow of the river current and so threatening the water's self-cleansing qualities.
We know that when dams are built, the water flow decreases, and so mosquito breeding potential increases. Wherever the water becomes stagnant, mosquito breeding will automatically increase. Because of this, we are undertaking studies in the Haridwar region. We immerse mosquito larvae in the water to see whether mosquitoes breed in it or not. We check this in our laboratories. We now believe that mosquito breeding does happen in Ganga Jal.
Dr. Dwar's research not only explodes the myth that mosquitoes can't breed in Ganga Jal, it's also the first clue to a terrible crisis which threatens the river today. As it continues its course through the land, there's a growing contradiction between the religious view of the river's purity and the actual physical state of its waters. As night falls on Haridwar, pilgrims congregate for the evening prayer ceremony called Ganga Aarti, meaning river worship. This is a powerful celebration of the life-giving qualities which the Ganges carries forth from here to fertilize the land. But the beauty of the ritual belies a terrible irony. For while Haridwar is where the Ganges matures into a mighty river, it also marks the place where this river of life begins a bitter battle to survive the pollution and excesses of the modern world. Leaving the Himalayas and Haridwar behind, the Ganges enters a very different landscape. These low-lying regions, known as the Gangetic plains, are some of the most productive and densely populated in Asia. The land owes its fertility to the Ganges, as the silt carried in the river's flow creates a rich soil in which crops flourish. Producing nearly half of all the country's wheat and rice, these floodplains are the breadbasket of India. It's no wonder that the Ganges is revered as the river of creation and abundance. It's the river's natural fertility that supports the region's exceptionally high birth rates, which are set to propel India's population to around 1.5 billion people by 2030. By then, India will have overtaken China as the world's most populous country. But the population growth which the Ganges has helped create is now threatening its very existence. Because urban development is poisoning the river. and the people who depend upon it. Located in the middle of the Gangetic plains, Kanpur is the first megacity on the Ganges. It's home to over 4 million people and a booming leather industry. The rich farmlands all around Kanpur have the highest concentration of livestock in India, making this the perfect place for leather production. Kanpur's 350 tanneries specialize in processing hides into heavy leather. But poor planning means there's no effective system for dealing with the massive amounts of industrial waste produced. For those who work and live here, the sulfurous gases pouring from the factories are a serious health risk. Rates of respiratory disease in this town are extraordinarily high. For the river, the effects are just as deadly. Most of the byproducts from the tanning industry end up in the Ganges. Though it is mandatory that tanneries have their own effluent treatment plants, at least half do not. All manner of waste from animal carcasses to toxic effluents laden with carcinogenic chemicals pour through 4 major drains, directly into the river. Madhapur is a fishing village a few kilometers downstream of Kanpur's leather industry. The residents here depend directly on the river for subsistence. Fishing used to provide this community with a good living, as Kishampal Kashyap recalls.
We used to watch our elders hunting for fish here, and they had to carry their catch in buffalo carts. Such big fish, long ones, weighing about 20 kilos. People couldn't even lift them sometimes. Then, as we grew up, the amount of fish gradually decreased. Some fish don't even come here anymore because of the bad water that flows from Kanpur. Sometimes dead fish pile up on the riverbank, and the Ganges stinks.
To most fish, the pollution in this water proves deadly. Among the few species hardy enough to survive is the local roe fish. But when caught, their flesh is so laden with toxins, it is practically inedible.
Sometimes we think, fine, we don't have anything else to eat, so we'll just cook this. But sometimes it turns out to be bad and makes the children sick.
The people of Madhapur know only too well how pollution is poisoning the river. But they can't escape its deadly effects. They depend on these waters for their survival.
When we're out fishing, we only have this water to drink. But when you raise your hand, it smells foul, and there's animal fat flowing in there. Your hands are sticky from the water, and it's so disgusting. God knows what they discharge into the river. It's not fit for drinking. When you raise your hand like this, you can see animal fat floating in the water.
Today, the river is so polluted that it's impossible to make a living from fishing anymore. To survive, people like Kisham have tried farming instead. But even the land is poisoned by the river water used to irrigate the crops.
We want to use the sand to grow cucumbers, melons, and vegetables. But when you plant seeds in the soil, they don't germinate. But even if they do germinate, when the plant becomes so big, it dies. That's it for us. Life is hell.
For Kisham and his family, the future looks increasingly grim as Kanpur's industrial development continues. Commercial growth attracts tens of thousands of new residents to the city every year. But this mass migration simply makes the problem worse. For the population of Kanpur produce their own waste, around 360 million litres of sewage per day. Poor planning means the city's treatment plants struggle to cope and vast amounts of raw sewage are deliberately discharged into the Ganges. The river has become a deadly threat to the people who depend on it. Nowhere is the problem more acute than at the Holy Ghats, where the local people attend their daily bathing rituals. Even here, the Ganges is considered to be holy, and washing in its waters is supposed to rid the body of pollution. These days, the opposite outcome is more likely. At the city's hospital, the true extent of Kanpur's pollution problem is made shockingly clear. Some 300 people a day come here seeking treatment for respiratory diseases caused by air pollution. The number of people suffering from waterborne diseases like cholera, diarrhea, and hepatitis is even greater. Women and children are especially vulnerable. Dr. Kiran Pandey is an obstetrician who has first-hand experience of the deadly effects of pollution on people's health.
If the water is polluted and people are drinking it, then the pollution is entering their bodies. Worm infestations are waterborne. Diarrhea is solely a water infection. Viral fever also originates in water.
There's no doubt that the polluted river is to blame for much of the death and disease suffered by the people of Kanpur. But they can't afford to protest too much. The wealth generated by the tanneries drives the local economy. For many residents, a dirty Ganges is a regrettable but necessary price to pay. Downstream, however, there are cities for whom pilgrimage is crucial to the local economy. Here, a poisoned Ganges presents a massive problem. The city of Allahabad sits at one of the most sacred river confluences in India. This is where the holy Ganges meets the earthly Yamuna and the mythical Saraswati River. Hindu mythology says that gods and demons fought a war here over the nectar of immortality, spilling some at the river's confluence. During the Kumbh Mela festival, pilgrims gather to venerate the place where the nectar fell, in one of the most important events in the religious calendar. In the course of this 45-day festival, Allahabad is transformed as some 70 million faithful descend upon it in what is perhaps the largest gathering of humans ever. The most important event of all is the royal bath, when pilgrims rush to the water's edge to perform a unique cleansing ritual for Mother Ganga. According to legend, when the goddess agreed to liberate mankind from its sins, she asked who would purify her afterwards. It was deemed to be the sadhus, who during the Kumbh Mela would bathe in the water, absorbing the river's sins and purifying her again and again. Being first to the river to cleanse the goddess is a much sought-after rite and has been the cause of stampedes in the past. But in 2007, things took a very different turn as the most committed holy men boycotted the festival. Disgusted by the pollution and islands of rubbish floating in the river, they refused to bathe until the authorities cleaned up the waters. Some even threatened mass suicide. These protests marked a critical junction in the river's story. Even the sadhus felt they could no longer ignore the contradiction between their religious beliefs and the physical state of the waters. Shocked by the swell of public opinion, the authorities opened an upstream dam to flush pollution away from the main ghats. It worked. The sadhus were appeased and the festival went ahead. But in the minds of the public, a new truth had been established, that the Ganges, though holy, is now less than pure. It's becoming clear that drastic long-term action is needed to prevent this river of life from becoming the river of death. A 125 kilometers downstream from Allahabad, the Ganges reaches the city of Varanasi. At this holiest of sites, the river is facing its most dire crisis. Varanasi is said to be the spiritual home of all 330 million Hindu gods and goddesses. It's also the only place on its entire course where the river runs northward in the direction of its source. Legend has it that the Ganges fell so in love with Varanasi, she nearly gave up on her seaward journey to stay in the city. This is the most important pilgrimage site in India. Hindus believe that those who are cremated and have their ashes thrown to the Ganges at Varanasi will receive eternal salvation. For this reason, Sikh people make a desperate pilgrimage from all around the country to spend their last days in this city. Living in the most primitive conditions, these women have chosen to leave their families behind and face death alone. Surendra Pasayad attends to the ill and dying on the riverbanks.
The old people who come to Varanasi think, if I detach myself from my family, I will find God. When you sacrifice one thing, you receive another. So people come here to find God.
In return for a small payment, Surendra makes sure that these women receive food and medicines for their pains. But to him, it's about more than money.
Helping the old people gives me more spiritual fulfillment than the act of just praying. I get a greater reward from serving the old people than from worship alone. That's why I do this work.
Not only does Surendra care for the sick, he looks after the dead too. When these women die, Surendra will fulfill their final wish by making sure that their bodies are ritually burned on the riverbank. The main cremation business is based here at the Manikanika Ghat, the holiest of all places in this city of holies. Working in this death factory is a dirty and dangerous job. Those who keep the fires burning day and night belong to the social group or caste known as the Untouchables. In traditional Indian society, untouchables are recognized as having the lowest status of all the castes. But at Malakanika, they command huge respect. For rich or poor, high or low caste, the deceased and their families depend on these workers to carry out a proper Hindu funeral. Package deals are available, even for the dead. All the wood, incense and manpower needed for a full cremation can be bought for some 950 rupees. That's about $20. Once the price is agreed, the death servants go to work. Firewood is weighed for the pyre, onto which the body will be placed. The corpse is lit from an eternal flame which is supposed to have been burning since the dawn of time. Meanwhile, the chief mourner, usually the elder son, has his head shaved as a symbol of his grief. After the ritual preparation, the mourner takes the twigs of holy kusha grass from the eternal fire to set the pyre alight. The corpse burns and the fire conveys the deceased to heaven. To the wider world, the public nature of this ceremony may seem macabre. But for Hindus, it is only right that this celebratory ritual should happen in the open. Few tears are shed as the mourners watch the souls of their dead ascending to the afterlife. Pregnant women and dead babies are considered devoid of sin. They don't need to be cleansed by cremation, and their bodies are floated directly on the water. At Varanasi, corpses wrapped in ornate shrouds are often seen floating along. The beach opposite the city is also littered with human remains. Yet still, every morning, Hindus gather to bathe, driven by an unshakable belief in the river's purity. One of them is Dr. Badra Mishra. Dr. Mishra was only 14 when he became the 7th priest in his family, a position passed down from father to son. He's also a professor of hydraulic engineering and is fully aware of the pollution which plagues the river. Yet for him, bathing in these waters is not a matter of choice, but a matter of faith.
The religious texts say that visiting the goddess, touching, washing, drinking her, cleanses our sins. I will not break from tradition, but I also just can't believe that there is no pollution entering the Ganges. There certainly is. So, in my case, there's a rationally trained mind as well as a committed heart.
Dr. Mishra believes it is the authorities, not the pilgrims, who are to blame for most of the pollution on the Ganges.
Saying that it's only the pilgrims that are making the river impure and dirty, this belief should come to an end. The Ganges is being harmed by those people who are overseeing the functioning of the cities and the factories, and those who are dumping the effluents of the many factories into the river, which we refer to as point sources of pollution. 95% of the pollution is caused by point sources of pollution.
Frustrated by the authorities' indifference, Dr. Mishra began his own Ganges cleanup campaign and established a research laboratory to monitor pollution levels. Today, Krupam Dubé works at the lab testing samples of river water for a bacterium called fecal coliform, which is present in human sewage. If it's ingested, this organism can cause deadly illnesses such as typhoid and hepatitis. The amount of fecal coliform present in the water is a prime indicator of the health hazard which it poses. The test results at Varanasi are shocking.
For drinking water, the fecal coliform content should be 500 or less. That's the permissible limit. Our samples are taken 5 meters from the riverbank because that's the furthest point from the bank that people are able to bathe. They also drink the water from there. And the fecal coliform count is found to be between 40,000 to 80,000. The biggest reason for this is sewage.
At Varanasi, the biggest problem is poor infrastructure. With a population of more than 3 million, this city suffers frequent power shortages. Without electricity, the pumps which operate the sewage plants shut down, and the backflow of waste ends up in the Ganges. The scale of Varanasi's sewage problem means that ordinary people are powerless to change it. But, driven by an innate desire to help the Ganges, they do what they can. Every morning, these men gather at the riverbank to clear the pollution with their bare hands.
Garlands, flowers, plastic, clothes. We pick them all up and put them in the boat. We take this rubbish to the other side of the river where the dogs and crows eat it all up.
They also pick up human corpses and carcasses of sacred cows, often found floating in the waters. But their efforts are just a drop in the ocean.
Of course, we feel there shouldn't be any pollution. We try and clean up, but the pollution continues. How much can be cleaned? There are just a few of us cleaning, but God knows how many are polluting.
Varanasi marks a crucial point in the Ganges story. It's here that the spiritual cycle of life and death associated with the river reaches its climax. It's also where hard science is most at odds with Hindu belief. The evidence proves that the Ganges at Varanasi is anything but pure. Many claim that the pilgrims' faith makes them blind to the problems. Others believe that even if people knew about the pollution, they would still feel compelled to bathe.
For them, the Ganges is the medium of life. Just like a fish cannot be separated from water, they cannot be separated from the Ganges.
What's more, Dr. Mishra is convinced that the people best placed to purify the Ganges are the very people who believe in her purity.
If I sit with the masses and say that the Ganges has become dirty, is polluted, within a minute or two, someone will get up and say, "Your Holiness, please don't say that. It's unbearable. What are you saying? Can the mother ever be dirty or polluted?" But when you show them what's happening, they say, "No, the city's sewage and drains should not be emptied into the river. This must stop." If this love and respect for the river can be harnessed, it can become a great power which can help us in so many ways.
If the power of love can truly save this river, then there is hope yet. for no river on earth is as loved by its people as the Ganges. Perhaps 4,000 years of faith in the purity of these waters will undo the last 50 years of neglect. But pollution is just one of the problems to be faced. As the glacier which feeds the river continues to recede, there is a real danger that the source of the Ganges will disappear. Yet India needs the river today more than ever. As the population boom continues, the amount of water available to each person is rapidly decreasing. It's estimated that by 2020, India's demand for water will exceed all sources of supply. Drastic change is needed to save the river and protect the future of her people. How that can be done is the challenge facing India today.